Covenant C2. We are diving into this thing for real this time, picking up right where we left off in the other video on installing this thing. Now, how do we actually use this? In this one, I'm going to be demoing against another target in my lab environment, another Windows machine, which is on a real engagement. Most likely the scenario you're going to be faced with is going to be targeting other Windows machines because most people are running Windows. Now, a lot of web servers are in Linux, so I'm going to cover how to exploit Linux as well in another video and interact with it using Covenant. It's pretty similar, spoiler alert for you guys there, but let's just dive into all the things you can do in this and what is the first thing that we need to do now that we have Covenant up and running. And if you haven't seen that video on how to get it installed and up and running, go ahead and check that out. I'll link it at the end of this video. Just skip to the end of this one and you'll see it on the screen. You can dive right into that. But with that being said, if you are learning this stuff and you are leveling up as a pen tester, as a red teamer, there's only a matter of time before you are ready to start interviewing for jobs, and you're definitely going to want to arm yourself with the top 10 pen test interview questions that you need to know to go ahead and ace that interview. Check that out in the description below, absolutely for free. But without further ado, we'll get right on into this. The very first thing we're going to need to do is actually set up a listener. So if you're familiar with getting reverse shells in the traditional sense that they teach you pretty much everywhere, this would be the step where you set up your netcat listener. You say NC LVMP 1337 or whatever port you want to listen on. Well, we're doing essentially the same thing, but with Covenant. So we're going to go to the listeners section on the left-hand side over here, and we're going to click create. Now, it will generate a random name for you, and we can rewrite this to whatever name we want it to be. And if you're on assessment, this is only to you as far as I'm aware. This is just something that you would use as the operator, so it doesn't really matter what you choose. So we'll say my listener, something generic, you know. But if we had a bunch of these listeners going for different purposes, we might want to label them so we know what is what, right? So I'll just call it my listener. Bind address is defaulting to all ports, which is fine. And I'm not going to use bind port 80 because maybe I want to host a Python web server on here in the future to do something. So I don't want that port to be in use. So I'm going to use a different port. We'll use port 443 in this case. And connect address is going to be the address of our IP on this network. Now it defaulted to the wrong interface. If I just come here and check out my IP address by running a simple IP config, we can see here that the address that I want to use is this ETH0 address, not the npcap loopback adapter. So I'm actually going to specify this IP instead. And oh yeah, by the way, we want to change this connect port as well to 443. And then you see that updates it in the URL there. And that's pretty much it. We could leave these defaults for now. Like I said, we're going to be doing mostly defaults. That is a few things that would change though right there. Then we hit create, and we should see that, yep, they created it here. And that starts the listener on our machine, which is something that we could see if we looked at the ports that we're listening on. So these are all the ports we're listening on. We'll see that one of them will now be port 443 right here. So it is listening, in fact. So moving on from there, now that we have our listeners set up, if we think about it in the traditional sense, right, you have your netcat listener set up, what's the next thing you need to do? Well, you need to supply a payload to your target that will connect back with the reverse shell. And maybe that's through exploiting a web app or something like that, or maybe it's through social engineering, you know, with the malicious Word document or whatever. What I'm going to do is keep it very simple for this example here. I'm just going to run the command in the terminal to simulate code execution on my target machine, and it should connect back to this listener. But in order to figure out what command do we need to inject, because remember, it's not a simple spawn bash, we actually need to run some special code that will spawn this grunt here to connect to our listener post. So the way we're going to do that is through this launchers section on the left-hand side here. And because we are dealing with a Windows target, and this is a Windows 10 machine, so it's pretty new, pretty up to date with its PowerShell, I'm going to use the PowerShell option. But keep in mind, we have a lot of different options here that we could, you feel free to play around with these and get, figure out how we get them working. Now, this is the part that is different when you're dealing with Linux, and we'll cover that when we get to the Linux targets. Obviously, we don't want to launch a PowerShell exe. That's not going to be helpful in that situation. So I can show you what other options do we have. What is another good way to do it against a Linux target? But for Windows here, we're going to use this PowerShell one. So I click here. And in terms of configuring this thing, we can really keep it pretty much default here with all this stuff. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier in the video. It defaults to a 5-second time delay. We could adjust that here. This is where we would actually do that one. And you see some parameter strings it's going to use. It's actually going to hide the PowerShell window because obviously you don't want the user, if you're executing this against a real target, you don't want them to see their PowerShell window open, and that would definitely tip them off that something weird's going on. If they exited out of that, it would kill our connection. So obviously we don't want that, so we hide the window from the user so they don't even know that this is happening. But yeah, pretty much using all the defaults here. I'm just going to go ahead and click generate. And what you're going to notice is that created all of this code here. So you have an encoded one, and then you have the unencoded one. And we could take either of these. Let me just take the encoded launcher. I'll click this to copy it to clipboard. Keep in mind, this is a super, super long command, as we'll see here in a second. So now that we've done that, to simulate the code execution here, and by the way, tying this back to the traditional way of doing things, this is equivalent to your command that would connect to your listener. So now that we've done that, let me just go to the target machine, victim target machine here. And I'm going to spawn PowerShell, and I'll just have an elevated prompt for that. And of course, you wouldn't have access to the machine directly, but you could do it through a malicious Word doc, through a vulnerable application, social engineering, any means necessary to get the code execution. You would need that first, and then you would inject the following here. And like I said, this is a very long command, which means sometimes this can fail on the first try. You might need to try it again if that's the case. When you paste something this long into a terminal, it can kind of have some weird behavior with it sometimes. But yeah, we'll just let it do its thing. There's one thing I forgot to do. Yeah, I got to disable antivirus on this because, like I said, we're just doing things the very bare bones minimum way. I'm not showing you guys how to bypass AV in this video. I want to keep it really simple and really focused on Covenant. Yes, in reality, you're going to need to do some AMC bypass and stuff on this. So it's probably the anti-malware scan interface that caught that, if I were to guess. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to have to actually utilize some bypasses and obfuscation to get this past antivirus in a real-world scenario. But let's just keep things pretty simple for right now. So let's just respawn this here and go ahead and paste this long payload in. Press enter, and you see it disappeared. That's a good sign because remember, one of the flags was hidden. And now if we check back on the attacker server, we see that this grunt right here has been activated and has like a random name. So if we go to the grunt section, we now see this here, and we can see the host name. And this corresponds to the host name of the computer that we compromised. So like if I were to come in here, CMD, host name, you see here, this is the one we're seeing there. So we do in fact have code execution against this server, which is great. As the self-made user, that's the user account that I have on the victim machine. So if I just click here, I can go into it and start actually interacting with it. So you have this interact section here where you can run commands and things like that. But if you're completely new to this, you might want to start in the task section where it has a nice drop down for you and shows you these are the different options you have. You have some AMC bypasses in here too, which is pretty nice. Definitely explore this stuff on your own as well. I don't have time to cover everything, but it does have some nice built-in things. Like you can run seatbelt for privilege escalation, which is a similar tool to like WinPs and stuff like that. Also safety cats. Rubius is on here as well. Shell CMD, which is super nice because it allows you to run your own custom commands as well. We could dive into that here in a second. But let's just start off super simple and run a who am I. So if I choose the grunt task of who am I can hit the play button here, and that is going to submit the task to the grunt. Now, like I said, it does take 5 seconds. It checks every 5 seconds. So as you notice, it was not instant. It took a little while, but we then did get the result back. And this is the equivalent to running the who am I command. And we could also do that here. So if I start typing, it'll tell me what my options are based on what I've typed so far. So I could find who am I from here, press enter. And this is the exact same thing, just using the command line. So I said there is no CLI anymore. The elite is deprecated. Well, this is the CLI, basically. The CLI is through the GUI now, as you see here. So this is the new way to do things. But if I wanted to actually run certain commands, like say I wanted to run an ipconfig, and I don't see anything built in for that, well, this is going to fail. It's going to say unrecognized command. But what I could do to run this command or any other custom Windows command that I want to run on the target is I could actually use this shell CMD here, and then I need to specify the command. So if I hit shell CMD, and then I say ipconfig, we'll give that a second, and it should come back with the ipconfig. And there you go. This is the output as if we were to run the ipconfig command on the target itself. So super handy. You can basically, you're not limited to the built-in stuff here. You can run anything you want, but these built-ins are nice little shortcuts for things. You can even upload stuff as well. You could put a keylogger on it. Super nice. Then there's some Active Directory specific stuff like Kerberoasting and things like that, right? Rubius can do a ton, right? You have the built-in Rubius stuff you can use on this as well. Mimikatz, all of that. Mimikatz you can use outside of Active Directory, just locally, of course, as well. But we're going to dive into all the Active Directory stuff later on in this series as well, so definitely stay tuned if you're interested in that. And yeah, just all kinds of really cool stuff, even port scanning, super neat. But another nice thing is this section here called taskings. So all of these here, these are the completed commands that we've ran. It actually logs all of them. You can see the command time and completion time, which could actually be very useful on a red team engagement, because sometimes the defense will say, hey, we noticed this. Was it you? Did you run this, right? And if they caught you, then that way you have the timestamps. You can verify, yeah, this was me, or maybe this was some other malicious actor who might want to be wary of that, right? So really nice to have that information right here, but I could click into any of these and I can see what the output was for that command and what the actual command was as well. So really handy. And this is basically what you need to know. I mean, you have your users there. You can create more users. So say you have more users on your team that you want to add, you can create accounts for them there. And you can actually have a nice place to store password credentials, hash credentials, ticket credentials, which is functionality we're going to be going more into as well. And not even just credentials, right? Screenshots, super handy, right? Downloads, have different indicators and things like that. So there's all kinds of stuff that this can do. And you can even have templates and everything. I want to keep this video very basic, very straightforward. And I would say these are the things that you need to know just to get up and running literally within about 10 minutes. You could be using this and implementing this and already getting a lot more value out of this than just using your standard Netcat reverse shell. Now, do I still use Netcat reverse shells? Absolutely. Why? Because it's quick. It's quick and dirty, easy way to do things, and I'm used to doing it. You can do it pretty quickly. And I think that, if you're going on against a CTF or whatever, sure, use the Netcat reverse shell. Don't worry about it, right? But if you're interested in red teaming, and especially if you're on an actual engagement, if I was doing a CTF that was like, Rasta Labs or a whole environment that I need to pivot around and do a bunch of stuff like that, then would I use something like this over Netcat? Absolutely. So that's my recommendation there. But yeah, let me know if you're enjoying this series, what you think of it so far, and what you want me to cover in this C2 series. I've already mentioned a bunch of stuff that I plan on covering in the series, but I'm sure you guys always have amazing suggestions. So don't be afraid to let me know down in the section below, and I'll definitely try to make it happen for you. And if you want to get into some more technical content, or if you just want to catch up on this series, in fact, I have that on the screen for you right now. So I'll see you guys right over in those videos. Thanks for watching.